she sat there, wrapped in a thin blanket that didn't stop the shaking. The police station lobby was cold. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, harsh and unforgiving. Monica stared at the floor, her fingers gripping the edges of the blanket so tightly her knuckles turned white. Officers walked past her, their voices blending into background noise. One stopped, asked if she needed anything. Water, maybe. She shook her head. She couldn't speak. Not yet. Not about what happened. Her phone had been buzzing in her bag for the last hour. Her mother, her father, 17 missed calls. She couldn't answer them. How could she tell them? How could she explain that the person they trusted most, the person they invited into their lives, into their family, had just shattered everything? 3 days ago, Monica had been excited. She just graduated college, finally done with the stress of exams and late-night study sessions. Her family had planned this trip for months, a celebration, they called it, a chance to unwind, to reconnect. Her uncle Bellingham had volunteered to handle the logistics. Hotels, rental cars, the itinerary. Everyone loved Bellingham. He was the fun uncle, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who made everyone laugh at family gatherings. Monica loved him too. Or at least she thought she did, before that night. The memory flashed through her mind, uninvited. The hotel door closing, the sound of the lock clicking into place, her heart racing, the realization that something was very, very wrong. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to block it out, but it wouldn't leave, and never left. It played over and over, a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. A detective emerged from a back hallway, a woman with kind eyes and a patient expression. She sat down next to Monica. Didn't rush her, didn't push, just waited. And finally, Monica spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, shaking with every word. I need to tell you what my uncle did to me. What happened during that family vacation would fracture Monica's family forever. It would expose a betrayal so deep, so calculated, that it would leave everyone questioning everything they thought they knew about trust, about family, about the people we let into our lives. How did a trusted uncle, a man who seemed so harmless, so caring, become the center of one of the most disturbing family betrayals imaginable? This is Monica's story. And if you stay with me, you'll understand why speaking up, why believing survivors, why protecting the vulnerable among us matters more than we could ever know. Before we go deeper, hit the like button so this story reaches more people who need awareness about situations like this. Monica was always the quiet one. Not shy exactly, just reserved. The kind of person who observed more than she spoke, who thought carefully before offering her opinion. As a child, she spent hours reading in her room, losing herself in stories where heroes always won and villains always faced justice. She was close with her parents, Grace and Anthony, but she never caused trouble. She got good grades, stayed out of drama, and kept a small circle of close friends. Her teachers called her gifted. Her classmates called her kind. Her family called her their little angel. And then there was Bellingham. He'd been part of Monica's life as long as she could remember. He was Grace's younger brother, only 15 years older than Monica, which made him feel more like a cool older cousin than a traditional uncle. He was the one who brought the best gifts at Christmas. He was the one who taught Monica how to ride a bike when she was 6, running beside her down the sidewalk while she wobbled and laughed and finally found her balance. He was the one who showed up at her high school graduation with flowers and a card that made her cry, because it was so heartfelt, so genuine. Bellingham had a way of making people feel seen. He remembered details about your life that even you forgot you'd mentioned. He asked about your dreams, your fears, your hopes. He listened in a way that felt rare, that felt special. Everyone in the family adored him. Grace trusted him completely. Anthony respected him. Monica's cousins looked up to him. If you had asked anyone in the family to describe Bellingham, they'd use words like charismatic, dependable, thoughtful, generous. He was the glue that held family gatherings together, the one who made sure everyone felt included, the one who smoothed over conflicts and kept the peace. But looking back, Monica would realize there were signs. Small things she dismissed at the time. The way Bellingham always seemed to find reasons to be alone with her. The time he offered to drive her to a friend's house, even though it was out of his way, then took a detour to show her a cool spot he'd found, isolated and empty. The way he'd text her late at night, casual messages asking how she was, what she was doing, if she needed anything. The way he'd compliment her appearance, not in a creepy way, just enough to make her feel noticed, valued. The way he seemed overly interested in her dating life, asking pointed questions about her boyfriends, their intentions, whether they treated her right. She never thought anything of it. He was family. He was Bellingham. He loved her. Or at least, that's what she believed. When Monica was in her late teens, Bellingham started acting more protective. If she mentioned going to a party, he'd offer to pick her up afterwards, said he didn't trust drunk drivers. If she dated someone new, he'd find subtle ways to criticize them, plant seeds of doubt. He'd say things like, "I just want to make sure he's good enough for you," or "You deserve someone who really understands you." At the time, Monica thought it was sweet. She thought it meant he cared. Her parents saw it the same way. Grace would say, "You're so lucky to have an uncle who looks out for you like that." Anthony would nod in agreement. Bellingham was respectful, never overstepped, never gave anyone a reason to question his intentions. He had a good job, owned his own home, donated to charity, volunteered at community events. He was, by all outward appearances, exactly the kind of person you'd want in your life. And that's what made what happened next so devastating. Because Monica, like everyone else, trusted him completely. She never saw it coming. It was late April when Grace first brought up the idea of a family trip. Monica had just finished her final exams, the last hurdle before officially graduating with her degree in psychology. She was exhausted but relieved, ready to leave behind the sleepless nights and constant stress. Grace suggested they all take a trip together, something they hadn't done in years. A road trip, maybe, a chance to celebrate Monica's accomplishments and spend quality time as a family before she started her job search and adult life really began. Anthony loved the idea. Monica did too. She imagined days spent exploring new places, evenings laughing over dinner, mornings waking up without an alarm for the first time in months. It sounded perfect. Within a week, the plan started to take shape. They'd drive to Colorado, spend time in the mountains, visit some national parks, stay in a few different towns along the way. It would be a 10-day trip, long enough to really disconnect from daily life, short enough that Anthony wouldn't have to take too much time off work. Then Bellingham got involved. He called Grace one evening, said he heard about the trip and wanted to help. He had connections, he said, knew the area well, could get them great deals on hotels and activities. Grace was thrilled. Planning trips was stressful for her, and Bellingham had always been good at logistics. He'd organized family reunions before, handled group trips for his coworkers, knew how to find the best spots and avoid tourist traps.
Grace told him to go ahead. Take the lead. Make it special. Monica felt a twinge of something she couldn't quite name when her mother told her Bellingham was handling everything. It wasn't suspicion, not exactly. It was more like discomfort. But she dismissed it. She told herself she was just being weird, that maybe she'd spent too much time alone studying and had forgotten how to be around people. Bellingham was doing them a favor. He was excited to be part of the trip, to contribute. There was nothing wrong with that. Over the next few weeks, Bellingham sent regular updates. He'd booked a beautiful cabin for the first 3 nights, a boutique hotel in a mountain town for the middle portion of the trip, and a larger resort for the final stretch. He'd mapped out hiking trails, found local restaurants, even arranged for a guided tour through one of the national parks. He thought of everything. Grace kept thanking him, kept saying how lucky they were to have him. Monica tried to share her mother's enthusiasm, but something felt off. She couldn't explain it, couldn't point to anything concrete. It was just a feeling. The week before the trip, Bellingham showed up at Monica's apartment unannounced. He said he was in the neighborhood, wanted to drop off some travel tips he'd printed out, make sure she had everything she needed. Monica invited him in, offered him a drink. They talked for a while. Casual conversation about her graduation, her plans for the future, the trip. He seemed normal, friendly, the same Bellingham he'd always been. But then, as he was leaving, he paused at the door. He looked at her for a long moment, longer than felt comfortable. And he said, "I'm really looking forward to this trip, Monica. It'll be good for us to spend more time together." There was something in his voice, something she couldn't quite identify. It made her stomach twist, but she smiled, nodded, said she was looking forward to it too. After he left, she stood in her doorway for a few minutes, staring at the empty hallway. That uneasy feeling was back, stronger this time. She thought about calling her mom, mentioning it, asking if maybe Bellingham was acting a little strange lately. But what would she even say? He came by to be helpful? He looked at me weird? It sounded ridiculous even in her own head. So she said nothing, and she tried to push the feeling away. They left on a Saturday morning, early, before the sun had fully risen. Monica rode with her parents in their SUV. Bellingham followed in his truck. The drive was long, but beautiful, winding through flat plains and then climbing into the foothills, the landscape shifting from brown to green to the deep blues and grays of mountain terrain. They stopped for lunch at a roadside diner, everyone in good spirits, laughing and joking and taking pictures. Monica started to relax. Maybe the trip would be exactly what she needed. Maybe that uneasy feeling had been nothing. They arrived at their first destination just after sunset. The cabin Bellingham had booked was stunning, perched on a hillside with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a valley. Inside, it was cozy and rustic, with exposed wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and enough room for everyone to have their own room. Grace immediately started taking pictures, already planning to send them to relatives. Anthony carried in the luggage, already talking about what hikes they'd tackle the next day. Monica stood in the living room, taking it all in, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. But Bellingham was hovering. She noticed it right away. He kept finding reasons to be near her, to talk to her, to pull her attention away from her parents. When she went to unpack in her room, he followed, offered to help her carry her bags, even though she only had one small suitcase. When she went to the kitchen to grab a glass of water, he was there, asking if she needed anything, if her room was comfortable, if she was excited about tomorrow's plans. When she sat on the couch, he sat next to her, closer than necessary, his arm draped over the back of the cushions. Grace didn't seem to notice. She was too busy marveling at the cabin, already planning meals and making a list of groceries they'd need to pick up in the morning. Anthony was outside on the deck, admiring the view. Monica tried to brush off Bellingham's behavior, tried to tell herself he was just being attentive, just making sure everyone was settling in okay. But it didn't feel okay. It felt suffocating. Every time she moved, he moved. Every time she tried to create space, he closed it. That first night they stayed up late around the fireplace, talking and drinking wine and reminiscing about old family memories. Bellingham told stories that had everyone laughing, stories about Grace's childhood, about their parents, about trips they'd taken when they were younger. He was charming, funny, the center of attention. Monica watched him, studied him, tried to figure out why she felt so uneasy. On the surface, everything seemed fine, but underneath there was something. An intensity in the way he looked at her when he thought no one was watching. A possessiveness in the way he inserted himself into every conversation she tried to have with her parents. When Monica finally excused herself and went to bed, Bellingham stood up too. He said he'd walk her to her room, make sure she had everything she needed. Monica said she was fine, but he insisted. He followed her down the hallway, stood in her doorway as she prepared for bed. He asked if she was comfortable, if the room was warm enough, if she needed extra blankets. She said she was fine, thank you, good night. He lingered. And then, just as she was about to close the door, he reached out and touched her arm. Just a light touch, nothing aggressive, but it made her skin crawl. "Sleep well, Monica," he said, his voice low, almost intimate, and then he was gone. Monica closed the door, locked it, and stood there for a long moment, her heart pounding. She told herself she was overreacting. She told herself he was just being nice, just being the same attentive uncle he'd always been. But deep down, she knew something had shifted. Something was wrong. She just didn't know how wrong it would become. The next morning, Monica woke up early, hoping to have some time to herself before everyone else got up. She made coffee in the kitchen, sat on the deck, watched the sun rise over the mountains. It was peaceful, quiet, exactly what she needed. But within minutes, Bellingham appeared. He poured himself a cup of coffee, sat down next to her. He didn't say anything at first, just sat there, close enough that she could feel his presence, that she couldn't ignore him. After a few minutes, he started talking about the view, about the trip, about how glad he was that they were all together. And then he said something that made Monica's stomach drop. He said, "You know, Monica, I've always felt like we had a special connection, like we understand each other in a way other people don't." Monica didn't know what to say. She smiled awkwardly, said something vague, tried to change the subject, but Bellingham kept going. He talked about how proud he was of her, how much he admired her, how he'd always thought of her as more than just a niece. Monica's hands started to shake. She set down her coffee, said she needed to go wake up her mom, that they had a busy day ahead. Bellingham didn't stop her, but as she walked away, she could feel his eyes on her, and she knew, without a doubt, that this trip was going to be a nightmare. The first 3 days at the cabin passed in a blur of forced smiles and mounting tension. Monica did her best to stay close to her parents, to avoid being alone with Bellingham, but he always found ways to insert himself. On hikes, he'd lag behind with her, claiming he wanted to make sure she didn't get lost. At meals, he'd sit next to her, his leg brushing against hers under the table. At night, he'd linger outside her room, always with some excuse.
"Do you need anything? Did you lock the window? Are you sure you're comfortable?" Grace and Anthony remained oblivious. They were having the time of their lives, disconnected from work and stress, enjoying the beauty of the mountains and the simplicity of family time. Monica wanted to tell them. She wanted to say something, anything, to make them see what was happening. But every time she opened her mouth, the words wouldn't come. What would she even say? "He's being too nice? He talks to me too much?" It sounded ridiculous. And Bellingham was so careful, so calculated. He never did anything overtly inappropriate when others were around. He was the perfect uncle, attentive and kind and thoughtful. The discomfort was all in Monica's head. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. On the fourth day, they packed up and drove to their next destination, a small mountain town known for its art galleries and local breweries. Bellingham had booked rooms at a charming hotel in the town's historic district. Monica was relieved. Separate rooms meant separate spaces, meant she could lock herself away at night, meant she wouldn't have to worry about Bellingham showing up at her door. When they arrived at the hotel, Grace checked in while the rest of them waited in the lobby. Monica looked around, taking in the old-fashioned decor, the vintage photographs on the walls, the cozy seating areas. It seemed like the kind of place where nothing bad could happen. But then Grace came back from the front desk, and Monica knew immediately that something was wrong. Grace looked flustered, apologetic. The hotel manager followed her, a thin man with a nervous smile and apologetic hands. He explained that there had been a mix-up with the reservation. They'd booked 3 rooms, but the hotel only had record of 2. And unfortunately, they were completely booked. A local festival in town. No other rooms available anywhere in the area. He was terribly sorry, offered a discount, asked if they'd be willing to make it work. Anthony sighed, rubbed his forehead. Grace looked at Monica, then at Bellingham. "I guess 2 of us can share," she said. Monica's heart started to race. She wanted to volunteer to share with her mom, but before she could speak, Bellingham stepped forward.
He said it made the most sense for Monica to share with him. Grace and Anthony needed their privacy. They'd been married for years. They deserved a romantic space. And besides, Monica knew him, trusted him. It wouldn't be weird. He said it so casually, so reasonably, that Grace immediately agreed. "That's perfect," Grace said, relief washing over her face. "Monica, you're okay with that, right?" Monica opened her mouth. She wanted to say no. She wanted to scream no. But everyone was looking at her. Her parents, the hotel manager, Bellingham. And Bellingham's eyes, they were calm, confident, almost daring her to object. If she said no, she'd have to explain why. And what would she say? She didn't have proof of anything. She just had a feeling, a terrible, gnawing feeling that had been growing for days. But feelings weren't enough. So she nodded. She said it was fine. And she watched as Grace thanked Bellingham, as the hotel manager handed over the keys, and as her parents disappeared into their room down the hall. Bellingham led Monica to their room. It was on the 3rd floor, at the end of a long hallway, isolated from the other guests. He unlocked the door, held it open for her. Inside, the room was smaller than she had expected. One queen-size bed, a small bathroom, a window overlooking the street. Monica's hands were shaking as she set down her bag. Bellingham closed the door behind them, locked it. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed in Monica's ears, louder than it should have been. "This will be fine," Bellingham said, his voice light, casual. "I'll sleep on the floor if it makes you more comfortable." Monica nodded, didn't trust herself to speak. She wanted to leave, wanted to run down the hallway to her parents' room and tell them she'd made a mistake, that she'd rather sleep in the car. But Bellingham was already unpacking, already settling in like this was the most normal thing in the world. And maybe it was. Maybe she was the one being weird. Maybe she was the problem. That evening, they all went to dinner at a restaurant Bellingham had chosen. Grace and Anthony were in high spirits, ordering appetizers and wine, laughing and enjoying themselves. Monica barely ate. She pushed food around her plate, smiled when she was supposed to, nodded along to the conversation, but inside she was screaming. After dinner, they walked through the town, browsing shops and galleries. Monica stayed close to her mother, linked arms with her, tried to soak up every last moment of safety. Because deep down, she knew what was coming, and she didn't know how to stop it. When they got back to the hotel, Grace and Anthony said goodnight, disappeared into their room. Monica stood in the hallway, frozen, staring at the door to the room she was supposed to share with Bellingham. He was already walking toward it, key in hand. He turned back, smiled at her. "Ready for bed?" he asked, and Monica, with no other choice, followed him inside. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Monica sat on the edge of the bed, her body rigid, her mind racing. Bellingham was in the bathroom, the sound of running water muffled through the thin door. She looked around the room, searching for something, anything that could help her. She thought about texting a friend, but what would she say? She thought about calling her parents, but they were right down the hall, already asleep, and waking them would require an explanation she didn't have. She thought about leaving, just walking out, finding a 24-hour cafe or a lobby chair to sleep in. But she was paralyzed, trapped between fear and disbelief, between the instinct to flee and the inability to accept that she needed to. Bellingham emerged from the bathroom, dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt. He looked at Monica, smiled, and started making a bed on the floor with the extra blankets from the closet. "See? I told you I'd sleep on the floor. No reason to be uncomfortable." Monica nodded, didn't trust herself to speak. She grabbed her pajamas, went into the bathroom, locked the door. She changed quickly, splashed cold water on her face, and stared at herself in the mirror. She looked pale, scared, not like herself at all. She took a deep breath and told herself to pull it together. Maybe nothing would happen. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe Bellingham really was just being nice, just trying to help out with the room situation. When she came out of the bathroom, the lights were off. Bellingham had turned off the main light, leaving only a small lamp on the nightstand. He was lying on the floor, his back to her, his breathing slow and steady. Monica climbed into bed, pulled the covers up to her chin. She lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the hotel. Footsteps in the hallway, a door closing somewhere, the hum of the air conditioning. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure Bellingham could hear it.
Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Monica's body started to relax, her eyelids growing heavy. Maybe she really had been overreacting. Maybe Bellingham was already asleep. Maybe nothing would happen. Maybe tomorrow she'd feel silly for being so scared. She started to drift off, exhaustion finally overtaking her fear. But then she heard it. The rustle of blankets, the creak of the floor, footsteps, soft, deliberate, moving closer to the bed. Monica's eyes flew open, her breath caught in her throat. She lay completely still, frozen, hoping she was imagining it, hoping it was just Bellingham getting up to use the bathroom. But then she felt it, the bed shifting, the weight of someone sitting down on the edge, and then his hand on her shoulder, gentle at first, like he was checking if she was awake. Monica didn't move. She kept her eyes closed, her breathing steady, pretended to be asleep. Maybe if she didn't respond, he'd stop. Maybe he'd go back to the floor. Maybe this was all a misunderstanding. But he didn't stop. His hand moved from her shoulder to her arm, his touch lingering, his fingers tracing slow circles on her skin. Monica's heart was hammering now, panic flooding through her veins. She wanted to scream, wanted to jump up and run, but her body wouldn't respond. She was frozen, paralyzed by fear and disbelief and the sheer impossibility of what was happening. This was Bellingham, her uncle, the man who taught her to ride a bike, the man her parents trusted. This couldn't be real. His hand moved lower, and Monica's mind shut down. She stopped thinking, stopped processing, retreated somewhere deep inside herself where the terror couldn't reach. Everything that happened after that moment was a blur, fragments of memory she would spend years trying to forget. The feeling of being trapped, the sound of his breathing, close, too close. The realization that no one was coming to help her. The understanding that she was completely, utterly alone. When it was over, Bellingham went back to the floor. He didn't say anything, didn't acknowledge what had happened. He just lay down, pulled the blankets over himself, and within minutes, his breathing had evened out again, like nothing had happened. Like he'd just gotten up for a glass of water. Monica lay in the bed, motionless, her body shaking uncontrollably. She stared at the ceiling, her mind blank, her heart shattered. Hours passed. The room grew lighter as dawn approached, and still she didn't move. She couldn't. All she could do was wait for the nightmare to end. Sunlight filtered through the hotel curtains, harsh and unforgiving. Monica had not slept. She had spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, her body rigid, her mind cycling through shock, disbelief, and a crushing sense of violation. When Bellingham's alarm went off at 7, he got up, stretched, and headed to the bathroom like it was any other morning, like last night had never happened. Like he'd just destroyed everything. Monica heard the shower turn on. She forced herself to sit up, her body moving on autopilot. Her hands were still shaking. Her mind felt foggy, disconnected from reality. She grabbed her clothes, changed quickly, and sat on the edge of the bed, waiting. When Bellingham emerged from the bathroom fully dressed, he smiled at her. A normal smile, warm and familiar, the same smile he'd given her 1,000 times before. "Morning, Monica. Ready for breakfast? Your parents wanted to hit that pancake place downtown." Monica couldn't look at him. She nodded, grabbed her bag, walked to the door. Every step felt mechanical, like she was controlling her body from a distance. Bellingham followed her out, chatting casually about the day's plans, about the art gallery they were going to visit, about the hiking trail he'd found for tomorrow. His voice was light, unbothered. He acted like everything was normal, and that terrified her more than anything. They met Grace and Anthony in the hotel lobby. Grace looked bright and well-rested, excited about the day ahead. Anthony was checking his phone, looking up directions to the restaurant. When they saw Monica, Grace immediately noticed something was wrong. "Honey, are you okay?" she asked, stepping closer, concern etched across her face. "You look pale. Did you sleep all right?" Monica opened her mouth to speak. This was her chance. She could tell her mother right now, right here, in the safety of the lobby with her father standing nearby. She could say it. She could expose Bellingham, could end this nightmare before it went any further. But before she could form the words, Bellingham spoke up. "She was tossing and turning all night," he said, his tone sympathetic. "I think the elevation might be bothering her. Or maybe something she ate at dinner didn't sit right." Grace nodded, accepting the explanation immediately. "Oh, sweetie, do you need to rest today? We can skip the gallery if you're not feeling well." Monica forced a smile, shook her head. "I'm fine," she said, her voice hollow. "Just tired. I'll be okay after some food." Grace rubbed her arm, gave her a reassuring smile, and the moment passed. The opportunity slipped away. Monica followed her family out to the car, Bellingham walking beside her, his presence suffocating. At breakfast, Monica couldn't eat. She stared at her plate, moving food around with her fork, responding to questions with one-word answers. Grace kept asking if she was sure she was okay, kept offering to take her back to the hotel. Monica kept saying she was fine, kept forcing smiles that didn't reach her eyes. Across the table, Bellingham ate heartily, laughed at Anthony's jokes, complimented the waitress, acted like the perfect family member. Monica watched him, a cold realization settling in her chest. He wasn't going to acknowledge what happened. He wasn't going to apologize or explain or show any remorse. He was going to pretend it never happened. And if Monica said anything, it would be her word against his. After breakfast, they walked through the downtown area, browsing shops and taking pictures. Monica stayed close to her mother, linked arms with her, tried to find some semblance of safety in her presence. But every time she looked back, Bellingham was there, watching her, his expression unreadable. Once, when Grace stepped into a boutique and Anthony was distracted by a street musician, Bellingham moved closer to Monica. He leaned in, his voice low, meant only for her. "Okay, kiddo?" he asked, his tone dripping with false concern. He seemed quiet today. Monica's stomach turned. She pulled away from him, mumbled something about needing the restroom, and disappeared into a nearby coffee shop. She locked herself in the bathroom, leaned against the door, and finally let the tears come. She cried silently, her body shaking with sobs she couldn't control. She cried for what had been taken from her, for the trust that had been shattered, for the family that would never be the same. When the tears finally stopped, she washed her face, stared at the reflection in the mirror, and made a decision. She couldn't tell her parents now, not here, not on the trip. But when they got home, she would. She had to.
The next 2 days were unbearable. Monica moved through them in a haze, going through the motions, pretending to be present while her mind screamed with the need to escape. Bellingham acted like everything was normal, which only made it worse. He was attentive, charming, the same uncle he'd always been. He made jokes, took pictures, helped carry bags, offered to drive. Grace and Anthony saw nothing wrong. To them, Bellingham was being the same helpful, thoughtful family member he'd always been. But Monica saw the truth. She saw the way he looked at her when no one else was watching. She saw the small, satisfied smile that crossed his face when she flinched away from him. She saw the calculated way he positioned himself near her, always within reach, always reminding her of his presence.
He was taunting her, daring her to speak up, confident that she wouldn't. On the 6th day of the trip, they moved to their final destination, a resort near a lake. The accommodations were beautiful, spacious rooms, a pool, hiking trails, everything a family could want for a relaxing vacation. But Monica felt like she was suffocating. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely hold a conversation. Grace was getting more worried, suggesting they cut the trip short, take Monica to a doctor. Monica kept insisting she was fine, just tired, just overwhelmed from graduation and the trip. That evening, while her parents were down at the resort restaurant for dinner, Monica stayed in her room. She couldn't face another meal, another hour of pretending everything was okay. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, her mind spinning. She needed to talk to someone. She needed to tell someone what had happened. But she was terrified. What if they didn't believe her? What if they blamed her? What if telling the truth destroyed her family? There was a knock at the door. Monica's heart jumped, panic flooding through her. She thought it might be Bellingham, come to check on her, to remind her of his power over her. But when she opened the door, it was her cousin, Lily, Grace's niece, who had driven up to join them for the last few days of the trip. Lily was 25, outgoing and warm, someone Monica had always felt comfortable with. "Hey," Lily said, her smile fading when she saw Monica's face. "Your mom said you weren't feeling well. I brought you some tea." Monica let her in, grateful for the company, for the distraction. They sat on the bed, Lily chatting about her drive, about her job, about random family gossip. Monica tried to focus, tried to engage, but her mind kept drifting back to that hotel room, to that night, to the violation that had shattered everything. And then, without warning, she started to cry. Not the quiet, controlled crying she'd done in the coffee shop bathroom. This was raw, ugly, uncontrollable sobbing that came from somewhere deep inside her. Lily immediately wrapped her arms around Monica, held her close, didn't ask questions, just let her cry. When the sobs finally subsided, Lily pulled back, looked Monica in the eyes, and said gently, "What happened?" Monica hesitated. The words were right there, on the tip of her tongue, but saying them out loud felt impossible. If she said them, they became real. If she said them, everything changed. But Lily's eyes were kind, patient, and Monica realized she couldn't carry this alone anymore. "Something terrible happened," Monica whispered, her voice shaking. "On the trip, with Bellingham." Lily's expression shifted, concern deepening into something more serious. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully. Monica took a deep breath, and then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she told her. Not all the details, not everything, but enough. Enough for Lily to understand. Enough for the truth to finally be spoken out loud. Lily's face went pale. Her hands tightened around Monica's. For a long moment she didn't speak, just sat there, processing what she'd just heard. And then, quietly but firmly, she said, "Monica, you need to tell your parents, tonight.
And when you get home, you need to go to the police." Monica shook her head, panic rising again. "I can't. They won't believe me. He's Bellingham. Everyone loves him. They'll think I'm lying. They'll think I'm trying to ruin the family." Lily grabbed Monica's hands tighter, forced her to make eye contact. "Listen to me," she said, her voice steady, strong. "What he did to you is not your fault. You did nothing wrong. And if you don't report this, he could do it to someone else. Maybe he already has. You have to speak up. I know it's terrifying, but you're not alone. I believe you, and I'll be right there with you when you tell them." Monica's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. This time there was a flicker of something she hadn't felt since that night. Hope. If you're still watching, it means stories like this matter to you. Share this video so it can reach more people who need awareness and support. Monica and Lily sat together for another hour, talking through what came next. Lily helped Monica organize her thoughts, encouraged her to write down everything she could remember, every detail that might be important when she spoke to the police. Monica's hands shook as she wrote, the pen barely staying steady on the paper, but she kept going. She wrote about the hotel room, about Bellingham's behavior throughout the trip, about the way he'd isolated her, the way he'd positioned himself to be alone with her. She wrote it all down, and with every word, she felt a small piece of her power returning. That night, after most of the family had gone to bed, Monica asked her parents to come to her room. Grace and Anthony arrived looking concerned, worried that Monica's sickness had gotten worse. Lily was there too, sitting beside Monica on the bed, a silent pillar of support. Her father closed the door, sat down in the chair by the window. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, reached out to touch Monica's forehead, checking for fever. "Honey, what's going on?" she asked softly. Monica couldn't look at them. She stared at her hands, twisting them in her lap, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Lily put a hand on her back, a gentle reminder that she wasn't alone. Monica took a deep breath, and then, in a voice shaking with every syllable, she said, "Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something, and it's really bad. I need you to just listen, okay? Please just listen." Grace and Anthony exchanged a worried glance. Anthony leaned forward, his expression serious. "Of course, sweetheart. We're listening." And so Monica told them. She told them about the hotel room, about waking up to Bellingham's hand on her, about the violation, the terror, the hours she had spent frozen in that bed. She told them about the way he'd acted the next morning, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just shattered her entire world. She told them everything, her voice breaking, tears streaming down her face, her body trembling with the weight of finally speaking the truth. When she finished, the room was silent. Grace sat completely still, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and horror. Anthony had gone pale. His jaw clenched so tightly Monica could see the muscles twitching. For what felt like an eternity, neither of them spoke. And then Grace let out a sound, a broken, strangled sob that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. She reached for Monica, pulled her into her arms, held her so tightly Monica could barely breathe. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Oh, I'm so sorry." Anthony stood up, his hands balling into fists at his sides. His face had gone from pale to red, rage flickering in his eyes. "Where is he?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. "Where is Bellingham right now?" Lily spoke up, her voice calm but firm. "He's in his room. But Anthony, you can't confront him. Not here. Monica needs to report this to the police first. We need to do this the right way." Anthony looked like he wanted to argue, like every instinct in his body was screaming at him to go find Bellingham and make him pay. But he looked at Monica, saw the fear in her eyes, and forced himself to stay put.
Grace pulled back, cupped Monica's face in her hands, looked at her with eyes full of tears and anguish. "Why didn't you tell us sooner?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you come to us that morning?" Monica's tears fell harder. "I tried," she whispered. "I wanted to, but I was so scared, and he was acting like nothing happened, like I imagined it, and I thought maybe no one would believe me. He's your brother, Mom. Everyone loves him. I thought you'd think I was lying." Grace shook her head violently, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "No, no, sweetheart, I believe you. I believe every word, and I am so sorry that I didn't see it, that I didn't protect you, that I put you in that situation." She turned to Anthony, her expression hardening. "We're leaving, now, tonight. We're packing up, and we're driving home, and we're going straight to the police station." Anthony nodded, already moving toward the door. "I'll start loading the car." Within an hour, they had packed everything. Grace told the resort there was a family emergency, that they needed to leave immediately. She didn't tell Bellingham. She didn't wake him, didn't confront him, didn't give him any warning. She simply took Monica and Lily, met Anthony at the car, and they drove away in the middle of the night, leaving Bellingham behind. Monica sat in the back seat, staring out the window at the darkness, Lily's hand holding hers tightly. The trip that was supposed to be a celebration had become a nightmare. But for the first time since that night in the hotel room, Monica felt like she could breathe. The drive home took 12 hours. They stopped only for gas and bathroom breaks. Grace called ahead, made arrangements for Monica to speak with someone at the police department as soon as they arrived. Anthony drove in silence, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his jaw still clenched with barely contained rage. Grace sat in the passenger seat, crying quietly, blaming herself, apologizing over and over. Monica kept telling her it wasn't her fault, but Grace couldn't hear it, couldn't accept it. When they finally pulled into their driveway, the sun was just beginning to rise. Monica had not slept. She'd spent the entire drive replaying everything in her mind, preparing herself for what came next. Grace helped her inside, made her a cup of tea, sat with her at the kitchen table. "We have an appointment at the station in 2 hours," Grace said softly. "Do you need anything? Do you want to rest first?" Monica shook her head. "I just want to get it over with." And so they waited, the three of them, sitting in the quiet morning light until it was time to go. The police station was cold and impersonal. Monica sat in a small interview room, a female detective across from her, a recording device on the table between them. Grace wanted to be in the room, but the detective gently explained that Monica needed to give her statement alone. So Grace waited outside, pacing the hallway, her heart breaking with every passing minute. Inside the room, Monica told her story again, slower this time, more detailed. The detective asked questions, took notes, her expression professional but kind. When Monica finished, the detective reached across the table, placed a hand over Monica's. "You were very brave to come forward," she said. "I know this was incredibly difficult. We're going to do everything we can to investigate this and hold him accountable." But Monica knew it wouldn't be easy. It was her word against Bellingham's. There was no physical evidence, no witnesses, nothing concrete to prove what had happened. Just her testimony. Just her truth. And she knew that in cases like this, truth wasn't always enough. The days after Monica filed the report were some of the hardest of her life. Grace called Bellingham, told him what Monica had disclosed, told him he was no longer welcome in their home, in their lives. Bellingham denied everything. He said Monica was lying, that she was confused, that maybe she'd had a bad dream or misunderstood something innocent. He said he could never do something like that. He sounded hurt, betrayed, like he was the victim. And that made Monica's blood run cold. Grace didn't believe him. She stood firm, told him she believed her daughter, told him to stay away from them. But the rest of the family was a different story. When word got out about Monica's accusation, the family fractured. Some believed Monica immediately cut ties with Bellingham, offered their support and love. But others hesitated.
They said Monica must be mistaken, that Bellingham was a good man, that there must be some explanation. Some accused Monica of trying to ruin Bellingham's reputation, of lying for attention, of being dramatic. She heard the whispers, saw the sideways glances at family gatherings she no longer attended. She heard through relatives that Bellingham was telling his side of the story, painting himself as the wrongly accused, the victim of false allegations. He had supporters, people who believed him, who thought Monica was lying. And that hurt almost as much as what he'd done to her. The betrayal of knowing that people she'd known her whole life, people who claimed to love her, were choosing to believe her abuser over her. Grace was devastated. Her brother, the person she'd trusted most outside of her own immediate family, had violated her daughter, and half the family didn't believe it. She did the same. He wanted to confront Bellingham, wanted to make him pay, but the lawyers advised against it. Any contact could jeopardize the investigation. So Anthony had to sit with his rage, had to channel it into supporting Monica instead. The legal process moved slowly. The detective assigned to Monica's case was thorough, compassionate, but realistic. She explained that cases like this were difficult to prosecute. Without physical evidence, without witnesses, it often came down to credibility. And juries were unpredictable. She encouraged Monica to consider therapy, to focus on her healing, regardless of what happened legally. Monica appreciated the honesty, even though it broke her heart. Months passed. Monica started therapy, began the long, painful process of working through her trauma. Her therapist was patient, kind, never pushed her to talk about things she wasn't ready to discuss. Slowly, Monica started to reclaim pieces of herself. She started to understand that what happened wasn't her fault, that she didn't cause it, that she couldn't have prevented it. She started to rebuild her sense of safety, her ability to trust, her belief that the world could still be a good place despite the evil she'd experienced. She joined a support group for survivors of sexual assault. Hearing other people's stories, knowing she wasn't alone gave her strength she didn't know she had. She met women who had been through similar experiences, who understood the complexity of family perpetrators, who knew what it was like to be doubted and blamed and called a liar. They became her lifeline, her proof that she could survive this, that she could heal.
One woman in the group, an older lady named Patricia, told Monica something that stuck with her. Patricia said, "You know, people always ask survivors why we didn't fight back, why we didn't scream, why we didn't run. But they don't understand how trauma works. They don't understand that when you're in a situation like that, your body and mind go into survival mode. You freeze, because that's what your brain tells you to do to stay alive. And that's not weakness. That's biology. That's your body trying to protect you in the only way it knows how." Monica cried when she heard that, because for months she'd been blaming herself for freezing, for not fighting, for not doing more. And hearing that it wasn't her fault, that her response was normal, was the permission she needed to start forgiving herself. Eventually, the district attorney's office made a decision. They told Monica they believed her, but they didn't think they could win the case in court. There wasn't enough evidence. Bellingham had no prior record, had a good reputation, had character witnesses lined up to testify on his behalf. It would be Monica's word against his, and the jury might not convict. They offered to continue pursuing charges if Monica wanted to go to trial, but they warned her it would be brutal. The defense would attack her credibility, bring up her past relationships, question every detail of her story. They would try to destroy her on the stand. Monica thought about it for weeks. She talked to her therapist, her parents, the women in her support group. Part of her wanted to fight, wanted to make Bellingham face consequences, wanted to see him held accountable in a court of law. But another part of her knew that going to trial might destroy her, that reliving the trauma in front of a courtroom full of strangers, that being cross-examined by lawyers determined to paint her as a liar, might undo all the healing she'd worked so hard to achieve. In the end, she decided not to pursue criminal charges. It was one of the hardest decisions she ever made, but it was hers, and that mattered. Instead, Monica focused on her own healing, her own life. She got a job, moved into her own apartment, started building a life that didn't revolve around what Bellingham had done to her. She stayed in therapy, continued going to her support group, learned how to set boundaries and trust her instincts. She cut off contact with any family members who still doubted her story, who still made excuses for Bellingham. It was painful, but necessary. She realized that healing meant surrounding herself only with people who believed her, who supported her, who chose her. Grace struggled with her own guilt for years. She blamed herself for not seeing the signs, for trusting Bellingham, for putting Monica in that situation. Monica told her over and over that it wasn't her fault, that Bellingham was a master manipulator that no one could have known. Eventually, with her own therapy, Grace started to believe it. She and Monica grew closer through the trauma, their bond strengthened by the shared experience of surviving Bellingham's betrayal. Anthony channeled his rage into advocacy, started volunteering with organizations that supported survivors of sexual assault, became a voice for families dealing with similar situations. 2 years after the trip, Monica was in a much better place. She still had bad days, still had moments where the trauma resurfaced and knocked her down, but she also had good days. Days where she felt strong and whole and proud of how far she'd come. She'd started dating again, cautiously, had found a partner who respected her boundaries and understood her triggers. She'd gone back to school, was pursuing a master's degree in counseling, wanted to help other survivors the way she'd been helped. And then one day she got a call from the detective who'd handled her case. There had been another report. Another young woman had come forward accusing Bellingham of assault. It had happened recently, under similar circumstances, during a family event. The detective wanted to know if Monica would be willing to testify as a prior bad act witness if the case went to trial. Monica's hands shook as she held the phone. Part of her wanted to say no, wanted to protect her peace, wanted to avoid reopening old wounds. But another part of her, the stronger part, knew what she had to do. "Yes," Monica said, her voice steady. "I'll testify. If it helps put him away, if it helps her, I'll do it." The detective thanked her, said she'd be in touch. When Monica hung up, she sat in silence for a long time. She thought about the girl who'd been too scared to speak up on that family trip. The girl who'd frozen in that hotel room, the girl who'd spent months blaming herself. And she realized how far she'd come. She wasn't that girl anymore. She was a survivor, and she was going to use her voice to make sure Bellingham never hurt anyone else again. Monica's story is one that happens far more often than we'd like to believe. The truth is, the majority of sexual assaults are not committed by strangers in dark alleys. They're committed by people the victim knows. Family members, friends, trusted authority figures, people who have access, who have built trust over years, who know exactly how to manipulate a situation to their advantage. And that's what makes it so difficult for survivors to come forward. Because when the perpetrator is someone you love, someone your family loves, someone who's been a part of your life since childhood, speaking up feels impossible. Let's talk about grooming for a moment. Because what Bellingham did to Monica didn't start that night in the hotel room. It started years before. The way he positioned himself as the cool uncle, the trusted family member, the one who always made Monica feel special. The way he slowly increased physical contact, testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push before anyone noticed. The way he isolated her, created opportunities to be alone with her, made himself indispensable to the family so that no one would question his intentions. That's grooming. It's calculated, it's deliberate, and it's designed to make the victim feel complicit, to make them doubt themselves, to make them believe that what's happening is somehow their fault. And let's talk about freezing. Because one of the most common questions survivors face is, why didn't you fight back? And the answer is simple. Trauma doesn't work the way people think it does. When you're in a threatening situation, your brain makes split-second decisions about how to survive: fight, flight, or freeze. And freezing is not weakness. It's not consent. It's your brain's way of trying to keep you alive when fighting or running isn't an option. It's a biological response that humans have evolved over thousands of years, and survivors should never, ever be blamed for their body's natural response to trauma. Monica froze that night in the hotel room, and for months afterward she blamed herself for it. She wondered if freezing meant she had somehow let it happen, if she could have stopped it, if she'd just been stronger, braver, more assertive. But the truth is, there was nothing she could have done differently. Bellingham created a situation where she had no power, no options, no way to escape. And that's on him, not her. Every choice he made that night was his. Every boundary he crossed was his decision. Monica did nothing wrong. Another critical lesson from Monica's story is this: believe survivors. When someone comes to you with a disclosure of abuse, especially abuse by a family member or trusted person, your first response matters more than you can imagine. Grace believed Monica immediately. She didn't question her, didn't make excuses for Bellingham, didn't suggest that maybe Monica misunderstood.